intertextual cardboard experience.
Hello and welcome to Intertextual Cardboard Experience. Fantastic 14th guest in Brigette Indelicato today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, how about you?
I'm doing well as well. I'm glad that we could have this talk.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm spoiling some of the things that I'm excited about, but there's definitely a lot that I've learned kind of looking into your work and that I know that I'm going to learn more of today. So
Thanks.
okay, so kind of just a note, since I've become entrenched in board games, the only place that I kind of look for and see graphic design is in board games, but it's one of those things that surrounds us. It's everywhere. Graphic design is everywhere. You worked in graphic design in other professions before working in board games. So if you could just talk about what type of work you were doing, when you started to play board games, what you were playing, and then where it all kind of started to converge, because I know where it fully converges, some other stories later on.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so after I graduated, my first real graphic design job was at a science museum in Philadelphia called the Franklin Institute, which was like a dream job because I'm very much kind of an amateur science enthusiast, especially astronomy and space kind of stuff. So that was a very cool job. I got to do a really wide range of things like exhibit related stuff, like a mural about the electromagnetic spectrum, to like donor materials and things like that. So that was a really cool job. And I met a lot of other cool nerdy people there too, who I'm still good friends with. I feel like when you find nerdy people out in the world, you tend to. I mean, I tend to hold on to them. We stick together.
You have to.
But yeah, yeah, totally. Um, but yeah, while I was working there, my now husband and I started getting into board games. And I had enjoyed classic games as a kid and stuff like that. But then we got into, Catan, Betrayal at House on the Hill. We also got very into Magic the Gathering, which we sort of burned ourselves out on that. We haven't been back down that road in a while. And also at the time, we lived in a house with 6 friends, so we had a very consistent D&D group because we all lived there, which I think it'll never be. We didn't know how good we had it at the time. But yeah, so we kind of got into all of the tabletop kind of stuff together then, and had a lot of fun with that kind of stuff. And then, so that was probably like 12 or 13 years ago. And then around 9 years ago, while our friends and us were getting into the hobby, we decided to start making our own game because we had played some storytelling games and all of the ones that we had played were competitive. And we found that you could never really tell a good story in a competitive storytelling game because you're always sort of wrestling away the narrative from other people. So we thought, what would it be like to have a collaborative storytelling game? So that was kind of our, inspiration that we, kind of jumped from. And at the time, we didn't even know really anything about making board games, about what a large community of people there are who make games. And luckily in Philadelphia, there's a lot of great groups and people who are working on stuff. And we got connected through some friends to Nicole and Anthony Amato, who are two folks who were making games at the time. And just like gave us a ton. Nicole gave me a ton of interesting resources and places to go and conventions. We didn't know necessarily about all of those things. Anyway, so I sort of got through that little personal project, got introduced to a lot of people in the industry, started going to events with kind of play testing our game. And that was the seeds of what turned into my freelance work as well. Because I met other folks who were doing graphic design in the industry, and also just realizing as I was doing the graphic design for my game, oh, this is something that needs to happen. I hadn't really thought about it as, a need, but that's kind of where it all started to coalesce together, these different, passions.
That's awesome. And yeah, you mentioned, right away kind of having that big group and a couple of the heavy hitters in Magic the Gathering and D&D And it's neat that you took some of the ethos of the role playing experiences and trying to create that collaborative experience. I mean, in situations like that, you don't really want to necessarily one up and win. So
Right,
translating that into that storytelling experience is a cool thing. And the game that you're talking about is The Plot Thickens, but I do have some questions for that later. So
yeah.
that sounds like the story in and of itself too.
Mhm.
So that's really great. And you kind of, I'm not sure if you answered it towards the tail end, but in that overlap of being a professional graphic designer while getting into board games and then starting to do some of that work yourself.
Mhm.
When you're playing, how much did you really take notice of the graphic design of the board games that you were playing?
Sure. I definitely noticed it even before I was, sort of working on it professionally. I feel like as a graphic designer, I just notice the graphic design of pretty much anything and tend to have strong opinions about it. And I feel like there are some times where it's like, oh, I know that this game is amazing, but it just doesn't look the way that I want something that I look at for a long time to look, you know. So I almost wish that I could kind of separate myself from it a little bit in some cases. But yeah, definitely have always noticed the design of things.
Yeah, it's there are the times where you want to separate, but it's also nice to have that critical eye, and sometimes you can just kind of pause it and be like,
That's true. That's true. Although I will say, like, after working at a museum, going to a museum exhibit, like, I just can't not see, like, oh, this is what material they made this out of. It's almost like there's too much to look at a museum exhibit because I remember, oh, this is how you spec this, how to print this giant sign. It's like, I'm never going to need to know that again.
well, I don't know. It's cool because it does. I mean, it gives you a different lens as you're
That's
walking
true.
around and enjoying it. So you get to see all the different exhibits and the work that was put into them.
That's a good
Whereas
point. Yeah.
whereas most people would probably look at the stuff and appreciate that it's well done, but not really think about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, well, cool. So it was something that you're definitely thinking about.
Mhm.
So what was not necessarily the first game, but an early game that you remember in your kind of re-emergence or reintroduction into the uh, board gaming hobby that really struck you as this game is really clean, this has a super strong graphic design, or it could be more than one, just
Mhm.
any games that fell into that category.
Sure. I think one of the first ones that really caught my eye from like a graphic design perspective was Fog of Love, because it was one of those sort of earlier titles that had that really clean, the white box and like very organized, and also just the kind of what was the way, I don't know if you've ever played it, but the first time you play, the deck is like an introductory. You don't actually have to read the rules because it sort of like takes you through on a kind of a tutorial with how the cards are ordered, which is just such an elegant solution that I think, yeah, the elegance of the design and how the game sort of worked really impressed me early on, and it felt really different than a lot of the stuff that was coming out at the time.
Yeah, I that's one that I'm definitely familiar with, but I haven't played. It's it definitely pops up a lot as one that's unique, but then also
Hmm.
from that design standpoint too. I
Hmm.
think I think you see examples of games maybe trying to do that onloading in different
Hmm.
ways now too. But also I feel like some of those games might be, at least from like the way that I'm hearing and internalizing people talking about them, maybe like a little too dense to
Mm.
introduce the games in that way. So it seemed like this was a perfect combination in that
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah, I think it was also sort of designed with more of the mass market in mind too. So I think that may have been part of it as well. But um, yeah. What about you? Are there games that stood out kind of early on in you getting into the hobby, or maybe even just now?
Oh, okay. That's a good question because, well, this is me jumping ahead. One of the ones that I liked was one of yours. It's our audience can't see it.
You're just saying that.
I am not. I mean, well, it's a combination of all things. I mean, it's the art, the design, and the game of Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think like everything in it just works so well. It's speaking of kind of just like a smooth game. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it checks like all of those boxes and you can, I mean, I think you can play games however you want, but if you really pay attention to the small touches from the illustration standpoint and just get immersed in the idea of moving the locals can just move however they want and then
Mm-hmm.
having the tourists just be slow and plodding just taking
Yeah,
up space sometimes. I don't
very
know.
thematic.
Yeah, that was one. Oh, okay, let me see. I'm gonna look over at my shelf, see if there's anything that stands out. I think, hmm, I think from one that definitely has a like a striking look and winds up grabbing people and is probably one of the more popular games in general would be Azul.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, you obviously have the combination of the physicality
Oh
being
yeah.
something that entices people to it as well. But I think there's a nice kind of clean and classic and timeless feel to Azul as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So those might be a couple of my earlier ones for sure.
Hmm. Cool. Well, thanks.
Yeah, no, I I really like Santa Monica. It's I don't know. It's been
It
like
was a fun one to work on.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I could look back, but it's been a little bit since I played it. I definitely played it in 2023 at least once or twice, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes games just, well, I don't know. Sometimes you just buy too many games.
Yeah, that's the truth. My
Yeah.
shelf of opportunity is definitely full of too many games.
Yeah, you get a fortunate camera view of the not the mess. We'll just put it that way. Okay, very neat. So we have some of the introductory stuff, and now we're kind of to the hook or the task or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
But I got this information from another video. It was a presentation that you led from the Tabletop Network, board game graphic design from pencil sketch to production. And most of those, a lot of those questions and the way you guided it through were, technical ideas and examples, and it was really cool. I needed
Thanks.
I needed to watch it in order to come up with questions for this. Let's kind of put it that way. But definitely more along like kind of like the technical side than the the stories or the questions I'm asking
Hmm.
as well. But you you do go to like the pencil sketch first. So you think about the the layout, the fonts, and everything like that. I don't. Okay, I'm not an expert in anything. And the reason I had to look so much is because my expertise in these areas is so much less than some of the other things that I'm not an expert in too.
Hmm.
But I like the look of words, and I like to read and write and play games. So I'm constantly influenced by the presentation of those words, whether or not it's something I actively engage in creating.
Hmm.
Um, so I like fonts and having none of that expertise that of anything created by hand. I have been struck by the ways that uh, they can perfectly capture and enhance the feel of a product on the whole. So I kind of even asked in some initial clarification questions to you about like fonts, and you noted that there are different terms that could be explored in, lettering, type design, font, and typeface. So the initial question then is, what are those, and how would one differentiate using those terms?
Right. So I will be honest that I had to look up some of these, distinctions between words. So just to be sure that I, knew what the specifics were. But I would say that, well, first off, that sort of the title on the front of a game box, I usually call a logo, since it ends up getting used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes publishers will put it on, merch or t-shirts or something like that. It also needs to sometimes exist on its own on the website or something like that. Some clients also refer to it as like the title treatment, but that logo or title treatment could be a lettering design, which lettering usually means that it's custom made from scratch. So, drawn using calligraphy, sort of sketched out and then made to be vectorized in the computer, something like that. Or it could use a font. And the difference between font and typeface, I feel like as a graphic designer, I would use them interchangeably. So I feel like this is very, sort of like more specific than anyone would really need to be. But apparently, typeface refers to like the whole family of fonts. So like Helvetica is a typeface. And then fonts refer to the individual weights. So Helvetica Bold or Helvetica Italic is the font. And the typeface is like the umbrella. But genuinely, I have never discerned between the two words in speaking about them myself. So I feel like you could use them interchangeably, typeface and font. But that would be sort of my breakdown of those of those terms.
Well, now I am equipped with that breakdown, and I can go out and pretend like I know it. Awesome. So then, technically the work that you're doing with starting to create the logo, and I like that term. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, just the way that it's used and branded that makes a lot of sense. So your work then would be more lettering, because you are creating like a non created before font, I guess, right?
So sometimes I do it completely from scratch. Most of the time I will start with a font. So like Santa Monica, I used a font to start from and then customized it to have that kind of like, more what's the word, like swashy kind of, inspired by the vintage signs from Santa Monica. I'd like to use a font as a starting place because, excuse me, then I can use the font in the game as well. Because I like when the logo sort of feels connected and cohesive with the rest, of the graphic design that's in the box. So I don't want to be, doing custom headers for every section of the rulebook or anything like that. So I like kind of using a font to start from, but it also depends on kind of the style of whatever the thing is.
Cool. Yeah, I guess, that, like you said, not having to go through every header, which a rule book could have, who knows how many.
Right, exactly.
You just lengthened your work process by like double.
Yeah. Yeah, but it usually involves lots of sketching and like thumbnails, like lots of tiny little sketches to figure out sort of the structure of how I want it to look, and then I'll figure out what font might, kind of work with what I'm sort of striving for.
Okay, neat. So I'm not honestly looking at this question now. It is the follow-up question, and I think it makes sense, and you kind of answered it to a degree too, just in the fact that you do potentially start from scratch or are working from a font to keep it consistent too. So I guess we'll backtrack. We're gonna go, this is not super off script, but was that type of work something that you had to do in some previous like in previous types of employment, or is that something that became like a unique design thing that you're working on when you got to board games?
Sure, yeah. It actually was an interest that I had when I was in design school, like in art school. I think at the time, the school that I went to, we had to do a lot of things by hand to start off with. Like the freshman year and pretty much the sophomore year, we didn't really use the computer at all, which I think isn't usually how, or art programs have kind of moved away from that a little bit for good reason, obviously. But I think it was good to have that foundation. So I think in school, I was more focused on sort of like the hand-drawn element. And then also even when we got into the computer elements of graphic design as well, just always incorporating that handmade sort of like custom personal style. That was something that I was just personally interested in. So yeah, hand-drawn typography has always been something that I enjoyed doing kind of on the side. I don't know that it came up super often for like in my work at the museum or probably more in freelance. Because while I was working at the Science Museum, I was doing regular freelance before I got into the board game freelance. So doing logos and things like that. So I sort of got to do that, have that outlet outside of my day job.
Neat. And okay, so you said that this was something that you enjoyed and did in college.
Mm-hmm.
When, I don't know if this is on here, but when in general did you know that that was something that you wanted to, like that you wanted to get into art and graphic design? Like it was.
Yeah. Well, my mom has always been a painter, so I just sort of grew up doing like being artsy, which was always really cool. And in in high school is when I realized I wanted to do graphic design because I was sort of one of those angsty teenagers who like didn't want to go to like high school stinks and I don't want to go. But then I took a graphic design elective in high school, and it was like the reason why I wanted to get up in the morning and go to school was like I want to keep working on this project that I'm working on. So when I realized that, I figured this might be a good thing to pursue if I'm this excited about sort of continuing to figure it out and kind of hone those skills.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. No, that is fun and I mean it is good. I mean, obviously just thinking about education of youth, you don't want
Yeah.
everyone to be super detached, but having that one thing that like called to you that stuck out, that wound up being
Hmm.
what it is that you want to do and is what you're doing
Hmm.
is a good story and is a good thing that happened too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a slight over dramatization. I didn't mind school that much, but it was just, it was the thing that really got me excited.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of my interests are in English language related things, so reading and writing, but that
Hmm.
I don't I mean I was always enjoyed reading. I think speaking of weird angsty bits, maybe in middle school I fell away for a couple of years, but then I kind of got
Hmm.
back to it after a rough start to high school English, but I don't think that was my fault. Different story. Then I
It's a rough
really
time. High school is just a rough time.
it is. Yeah, especially the beginning when you're but after that I think things smoothed out and I realized the things that I enjoyed and they
Hmm.
were English related.
Hmm.
And then it probably took me like college to really fall in love and be super dedicated to those
Mm.
tasks, but
Yeah. Cool.
I made it to that point in order to to get all
Right,
that
right.
done. Awesome. So okay, with all of the font typeface and other terms that I've thought I was going to remember but I've already forgotten, uh, by the end of the episode, this is your task now. We have a title for this episode, and it is thick plots and sick fonts. So you have to kind of gauge the way that the conversation went, and pick a font or lettering that you feel matches this episode's title.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, and then yeah, that's all you have to do. Who knows? It could be really tricky where I take this stuff. Okay, cool. So that's your task, and we're in a transition topic of sorts, because now we're moving on to some other things. But I kind of already mentioned it, but I was a fan of your work for some time before really knowing it. One of the examples that I had written down for myself was Santa Monica. It's one of my earlier games, for sure. I love it. The design and all design work for it is great. I feel like everything matches. But I think it wasn't until a couple of years playing that game that I knew that your work was in there. And that's not that it wasn't, credited in the rule book or anything like that, but
Sure.
Just didn't know. And then I kind of looked to see all the games you've worked on, and there are so many. And then I think it just kind of got me thinking about the fact that in the past handful, or maybe even more so, like more recently in those past handful of years, that I've been a part of the hobby, that I have grown to look for more things that are related to like all the people involved in the projects. But it also seems that that as if there is more, like recognition, attribution, and so on that has been happening as well. So is this something that you've noticed? If so, how? And then additionally, what do you think can be done to highlight the work of more people involved in like all aspects of the design and development process?
Yeah, I do think that it has improved recently. I know sort of one kind of just evidence of that is on BGG, on Board Game Geek. It used to be that there wasn't a place to credit a graphic designer, so we would often just be in the list of artists, so it wasn't really clear sort of who did the art or who did the graphic design. So that has recently, I guess, actually, I don't know how recently, maybe in the last couple of years, they added the graphic design field, and a number of other fields too. I think maybe developer, and there were a few that weren't on there before. So it's good that there's kind of a more thorough list on there, since so many people use that as a resource, and also for finding other things that they like based on, what different people who have worked on things. So I think that was a great, kind of development. It would be nice to see, for it to become more the norm, to mention other folks who are involved in the game process. I think in, whether it's reviews or like features in magazines and blog posts and things. Yeah, I mean, I know there are a lot of people involved. I think that's probably the problem, that you kind of have to draw the line somewhere, because so many people can be involved in the the creative side, and art direction, developing, like sensitivity consultants. There's so many people who can be involved in a big project. So it makes sense that it would be tough to mention everyone, but it could be nice for, maybe in the YouTube description of a review, just throw, the ones that are credited in the rule book, right? But another good development too, I think, in the last few years is, I don't know if have you seen the Senate magazine?
I have not.
It's a gorgeous magazine that comes out of the UK. That's the tagline is "Board games are beautiful." I have a few I mean, people who are listening won't see me show them on the Zoom, but I'll send you a link.
Okay.
Because it's a really beautiful magazine, and they feature artists, they feature game designers. Like, it's a really comprehensive sort of look at what's coming out soon, like lots of beautiful photography. So I feel like that's an indication too of just sort of like the focus on board games as kind of art objects, or just as things that the design and art of them can be the main focus, as well as the mechanics.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome magazine, and it's definitely, yeah, send me the link. I write it
Yeah.
down, but I write down a lot of things, so send
Yeah.
it to me nonetheless, and I'll definitely look into it. But yeah, you make a good point that, I think depending on the project, you can have a whole bunch of people involved in the process. I just got done playing, and this is a callback to a really early episode when I had Liz Davidson on. She was talking about the video game Pentiment. And
it's a gorgeous game.
it's so gorgeous. And I just finished it last night.
Mm.
So, I think I purchased it a week after we had talked way back in August or September or something. And then I kind of sidelined it until Thanksgiving and then until winter break. And then I've really kind of made sure I've been consistent with it. But I finished it last night, and I mean, I feel like most of the time I go through video game credits, but video game credits are so long sometimes.
Oh yeah.
But I still do it nonetheless. And yeah, I think the ways to recognize, and that's impressive too, thinking about all the people that were involved in that project and all the different translations and all the
Oh
places
yeah.
that it's going to and everything like that. It's neat. I think the more that's recognized and highlighted, it's just going to add to people's experiences and the understanding of the amount of work that was done too. So
Yeah. Yeah, I watched my husband play that game and I really enjoyed it because there is a lot of stuff about fonts in there. And
yeah.
all the different characters, like the printing press character had, movable type as his font for his speech bubbles. And then like the peasants have handwriting. It was just like so creative.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just the way that they used it, and I don't think this is much of a spoiler, but there's no voice acting. So I mean, that's one thing that didn't have to go credited, but just the personality that you said through the different fonts and things that were used.
Yeah.
I mean, you could feel it and kind of hear it in your head differently, and
For
yeah,
sure.
so it was recommended to me, and I'm just forwarding that recommendation
Yeah.
because it's an experience for sure. But yeah. Oh yeah, I think I'm back on track. Where my head's supposed to be. But yeah, okay, yeah. So the magazine and just potentially thinking about like ways that different reviews could highlight like who's credited in the in the rulebook. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, neat. So now, okay, so that was a transition point, but we're still kind of thinking about some of your design thoughts and stories, kind of like that middle section, I guess. So what are your goals for creating a cleanly presented board game? How have they changed and grown? And what aesthetic feeling do you think can be most attributed to a game with your work in it? You can choose how you want. all or none.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'll go through them. So my goals for creating a cleanly presented board game. I think it always starts with, well, I always try to play the prototype before I work on the graphic design for a game because I want to have a full understanding of how it works because yeah, I always want the design decisions to be informed by how can we make this visually the most intuitive for the player to understand, play, interact with. So I think the biggest thing is, I guess this is sort of like a graphic design term of like visual hierarchy. So like, what's the most important, what element on a card layout is a player going to need to use the most often, right? So that should have the most visual weight so that it's easiest to reference, that kind of thing. So I think the goals are for it to be, like visually appealing, but also very intuitive for the user. Yeah. And how have they changed and grown? I think something that's changed for me personally is I definitely was taught that as a graphic designer that sort of the simplest solution is always the best one. And I think I've learned with board game graphic design is that because it's something that's fun and thematic and, like having some more flavor to it can be worth it also, as opposed to like a advertisement or sort of like the classic graphic design applications. Like sure, maybe you want that to be as clean and functional as possible, but with board games I can let myself get a little bit more you know not decorative, I feel like that's not the right word, but sort of adding a little bit more personality or like things that aren't completely necessary. And then aesthetic feeling, I would like to say that like clean and elegant would be sort of like a recurring or whatever. What am I trying to say? An overarching characteristic to my work. But that's what I strive for. I'm not going to say that I'm always successful, but
Well, based on my experience, I will say that you're always successful. So
thank you.
yeah, of course. And I just feel so under-equipped to comment on the press. I mean, I feel that way all the time, but just particularly here, but just kind of, I don't know. I think just, I mean, with the experiences that you had as playing games, for so long too, and then trying to get that feel in those initial plays with the prototypes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It seems to me, it just seems fun. I mean, obviously
Mm-hmm.
you enjoy doing it, but it just, you have these, mechanisms, maybe title, maybe other things that are kind of like, floating around that you're trying to capture, but it's not a blank canvas, but there's still like a lot that needs to be added in order to make those pieces cohesive or elegant or what have
Mm-hmm.
you. I
Yeah,
don't know. It seems neat.
for sure. Yeah, and I think something that makes board game graphic design particularly appealing to me is the thing that I think drew me to graphic design is like the creative problem solving. And actually, I think it's what it draws me to board gaming in general, right? Is that here's a set of problems that you need to figure out how to solve in your own, like personal or creative way. Uh, so I think that's what I enjoy about graphic design, and I think it's brought to another level with board game graphic design because I have to think about there's so many other sort of variables to problem solve for, like how does someone hold this in their hand? How does it look on the table? How do the mechanics relate to how it looks? All that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, the things that I love about graphic design are sort of dialed up to 11 with the problem solving of, applying it to board games.
Neat. Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it a little bit in the tail end of that thought about all the considerations you need to have, like all of these quality of life types of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So what's one quality of life design decision that you think all games should include but don't necessarily?
I think not to be, to harp on the main theme of the title and everything, but I feel like legible fonts really are a subtle way that people can sometimes go off the rails with board game graphic design. And because you're trying to be so thematic, like making sure that the functional type is like clean and easy to read. Um, yeah, I think that would be that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah,
Does anything occur to you, like as a player sort of?
Mm, I think something that I think there are different sorts of accessibility considerations that I've seen more of,
Mm,
and I'm trying to think. I don't know if it's one particular company, but some games colors will have the keys, and I mean I think you see this on cards, playing cards, a decent amount more now, but I think there might be some general attempt at universality for different companies to have all their games have that, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm.
So here, I don't actually have it pretty close. So if I'm pulling out this one, I mean, speaking of games that have cool art and design, I'll show you the box quick. This is Sea Salt and
Mm.
Paper,
Yeah, I haven't
but
played that yet. I've heard good things.
oh yeah, it's uh definitely like a pretty game.
Hmm.
And so if you see the card,
Hmm.
so I don't know, my camera's really bad, but up by the anchor, there's a
Hmm.
little box, and in the box, each color has a different symbol.
Hmm.
And honestly, I'm not sure, like looking at these ones, if it is the most functional option, because one has a triangle facing one way, one has a triangle facing the
Mm.
other. So perhaps
Mhm.
there's a better way to go about that still even. But I think certain games that do rely on or need to have colors that are kind of close, whether it's for, you know, people that have any level of, you know, color, like can't see all the colors, or even just
Mhm.
different lightings. There's times where I'm playing
Mm.
where I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know the difference. Is this red? Is this purple?
Mhm.
So something along those lines, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope that I hope that wasn't complete like I had that idea in my head like when you asked, but
Mhm.
I don't I don't know if having like a universal key is the best option though, because I think
Mm.
different games might need different things, but I think an
Right, yeah.
attempt or something that makes it stick out is probably the best option.
Yeah, I think most clients that I work with want, colorblind accessibility in whatever I work on. So I usually try to keep that in mind.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think there's for you, there's probably a whole bunch of different ways that you can consider it. So
Hmm.
none of them that I would be in the know and able to do. So okay, so way earlier, I was kind of thinking about. Well, I kind of mentioned the fact that actually you mentioned the fact that when you visit museums now, that you
Hmm.
you think about uh, the the layout and everything in a different way than most people would. So you do have this lens, as
Hmm.
I kind of mentioned previously, that you get to view the world through. So, what are examples of graphic designs in other mediums that really stick out to you?
Yeah. The the thing that crossed my mind was graphic design in films. There's some really great. I know there's a specific graphic designer who works on. Uh, oh man, how am I blanking on Wes Anderson films and does all the like packaging for the fake, worlds and she published a whole book on it and it seems like a really interesting sort of like completely different rabbit hole to go down. But I feel like that was another example of kind of a silly like thing that I would notice is or that a graphic designer might notice is anachronistic fonts in movies. So, there'll be there's a specific example of like a modern movie that was made black and white and was supposed to be like, set in the 20s or whatever. And there's a scene where all these like newspapers or like article clippings are falling down. And I and like some of the fonts are very clearly what like, oh, I know that font was designed in like 1990 or like in 1970 and like these clearly could not be in this 1920s setting that they're talking about, which is so silly, but it does tend to stand out to me when I see fonts that like aren't in the right time period.
I mean, I'd have to imagine that pops up a decent amount. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd have to see like I'm sure that there's plenty of projects that are super thorough, but I think that's one of those things that might fall through the cracks.
And like the amount of people who are going to notice, it totally makes sense to not worry about it. It's probably just, less than 1% of people who are going to notice.
Well, every time I watch a movie that has tries to do a period piece, I'll pause it and I'll see if I can deep dive
See
and
if,
figure out if is this right?
yeah,
Did you do your homework?
yeah.
Oh, oh, that's funny. Yeah, because I mean, in inconsistencies or anything that's incongruous in movies, those are the things that will stick out to a lot of people. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
that's that's a detail.
Yeah.
Oh, neat. Okay, this question is a bit much, but we'll go through it. Uh, so in how widespread of a capacity do you think graphic design has an impact on the world? So purchasing habits, interfacing with technology, anything, compared to the amount that most people would even consider its existence and or impact?
Sure. Yeah, I think the comparison, I think that it has much more of an impact than people would, recognize. And, there's plenty of avenues you could go down of like the advertising aspect of things or, you know, the user interface. And that's sort of a whole nother, career and like expertise, speciality. But yeah, I think there are subtle things that do have an impact, but you wouldn't actually notice. Like it's something that comes to mind is like the kerning of letters, and like that's the space in between all of the letters in a word, like on a on whatever any kind of design. But because letters are shaped differently, you sometimes have to go in and like customize the letting, the spacing in between the letters, and that's the type of thing that like no one it would look at something and be like, oh, those letters fit nice together. But if it was wrong, you might like just have a sense that like, oh, there's something like that doesn't feel smooth about that or clean or whatever, So yeah, that might be way too specific of an example, but just of like, it's sort of an invisible influence, I think, in a lot of cases.
No, yeah, I'm thinking about that. I mean, I think my general conception is it's probably kind of what you said at the end. Like it's one of those things that you'll notice if it looks wrong.
Right, right.
But most of the time, the thought in order to make it look right or to make it not stick out in that way is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what people are kind of used to. That's what people are expecting. And I'd have to imagine, if we're looking at words on a screen that are really tiny, things like that might not be super apparent. But if you're having to design something that's bigger in any capacity, like if you scale it up, 3 times the size, it becomes
Mm-hmm.
that much more noticeable and the
Right.
more and more. Huh, that's really interesting. Oh, cool. Okay, so kind of the last graphic design thought related question before getting to the section on the plot thickens is this one. So, I'm sure that all of your projects do provide challenges and or fun stories. What is one or a couple or any number of the more challenging, memorable projects or moments in the project that you've had to work through?
Sure. Um, the one that came to mind was working on Dice Miner, which is a game from Atlas Games. It's actually one of my favorite games that I've worked on to play. It's probably my most played game that I've worked on. And it's sort of like a mountain. There's a cardboard mountain of these dice, and you're dwarves that are mining these dice, and trying to get different combos and stuff. That's an oversimplification, but so I had to design, a ton of faces of the dice and like different pips, and it's actually really tough to. It's sort of an intricate balance because of course they have to be legible at a small size, but then also the way that dice are manufactured, uh, they coat. So there's like the little inset of the, whatever the icon is on the dice, and then they coat the whole thing in the ink of what the symbol is supposed to be, and then they tumble the outside of the die so that the ink does not stick to the outside, so that only the recessed area has the ink. So you can't have too large of like any part of the icon can't be too large because then the ink will get buffed away, which I learned all of these specifics with this game. I had never worked on so many, I worked on this many dice designs. So there's like a dragon, there's shields, there's a bunch of different shapes, and they went through so many different iterations. Actually, I think in the video presentation that you mentioned earlier, I talk a little bit about that process of like, here's the ones that totally didn't work, and I had to, like refine a bunch from. So that was a really cool sort of like very specific parameters that I had to work in. And then also, it was fun to see all of the dice when they came in real life.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple follow-up questions. So thinking about that game, if I'm not mistaken, there were some differences in the retail and Kickstarter with the actual mountain that you're drafting from.
Mhm.
Did Was that a production choice or thought that you were a part of for the different mountains?
No,
Okay.
yeah, there was actually a lot of folks involved in that part of engineering the punchboard mountain and of doing the sculpt of the plastic mountain, so there were a lot of folks involved on that one. But there are some games that I get to be a part of, like the coming up with the concept or, the theme. Like one of my first projects was War Chest. It's sort of an abstract game that they had a lot of different directions that they were thinking about going in the beginning, that I did kind of different mood boards and like um inspiration images for kind of deciding which direction to go. So that's been, even though it was one of my first ones, it's always been one of my favorites because I sort of was part of the creative process from the beginning, and that's always really rewarding to kind of be there for the whole journey.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of War Chest. Coincidentally, behind me is, well, it's one of the places where I store games, but it's what I deem my War Chest because that's where I have most of my historical related games are in there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also
Nice.
keep War Chest in it as well. That has to
Nice.
be.
Of course. That makes sense.
Oh, cool. So, kind of thinking about that, you get another follow-up question because you're just like making things spin my brain a little bit.
Mhm.
But so with that said, are there any okay, so like the dice thing is super cool, just having, well, I'm sure it was rewarding and challenging, but are there any, okay, I'm not sure because your goals are to have this, streamlined elegance and have things work together, but there are any like component considerations or things that you've wanted to have in a game that are just kind of a little bit outlandish just for fun
Mm.
that have gone through or haven't, or you just wanted it or thought about and you're like, this is definitely something that is a no-go, but I think it'd be fun nonetheless.
Hmm. I'm trying to think. I mean, I always love when a client wants to do gold foil because it just always looks very classy. And it's pretty much never necessary. Um, yeah. Yeah, I don't think like a component aspect comes to mind, but yeah, doing different stuff on the cover, like different printing effects and stuff. Like I don't have you seen Turing Machine, that board game?
I that's another one that I know it, but
Yeah.
I've seen pictures. I haven't actually physically seen it.
So the top of the box has die cuts in it. So there's like holes in the lid of the box that like reveal the color that's underneath. And I've always wanted to do that in a game. And I figured I guess the opportunity hasn't come up. And then also it must have been so hard to figure out how to do. But when that came out, I was like, oh, that looks so good. And it's just perfect for the way the game works. I really like that one.
Yeah, it seems like that one or those, it's what kind of more of a deduction-ish thing
Yeah.
with the game
Like
sets up the puzzle differently. I don't know.
it's genius. I don't know. There's a lot of math involved that I would have no concept of whatsoever. So
Well, I mean, it's kind of been on one of my like background lists of if I see it on sale or
yeah.
something, I'll pick it up and maybe I'll get bumped up and maybe someday you'll have the opportunity to do different
Yeah.
box experiments. And if not,
Yeah.
you're gonna push for it now. So
Yeah.
is it necessary? No,
But
we're
it'll
doing
look cool.
it. Awesome. Well, okay. Speaking of games that you have worked on, you mentioned wanting, like with you and your group of friends wanting to create a game that created different storytelling experiences in a collaborative manner. And that game is The Plot Thickens. So my quick explanation of the game, and you can correct me
Mhm.
when I get things wrong. You have different types of cards for people, places, and things, and you receive. I'm not going to get numbers right. Speaking of math things, I'll just try my best. You get cards. I think you get 5 because you can play up to 5.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, good. And then based on the number that you are able to, play and integrate kind of in a particular order that you choose to create like a little story, you get these little plot tokens, and then you keep those, and then other people get cards out to add to the story. And then once you have those tokens and start integrating the other elements of other people's stories, you can put your tokens on the other people's stories.
Mhm.
That good? Close?
Yeah, yeah, I would say it's sort of like an improv type game. So you're using the words in your hand to kind of improvise a story. And yeah, then the goal is to use those plot points to interconnect as much as possible. And then at the end of the game, the person who connected the most is the main character, and they get to say how the story ends. And then the person who was connected to the most is the author, and they get to name the story. So we wanted to come up with some sort of just like fun incentives that would be like not super competitive, right? Because the goal is to tell a fun story together.
Yeah, that's funny. I wonder, yeah, I hope that people playing that don't take it too too seriously to the point where like
Yeah,
I'm gonna be the author. I'm gonna be that person.
right,
But
yeah.
oh
Yeah, we
yeah,
tried to write the rule book in a way that set the tone, for a collaborative experience.
yeah, and kind of well, I saw it relatively recently, but the Dice Tower had a play of that. I think it was for their Winter Spectacular, so it wouldn't have been that long
Mhm.
ago. And I think that video does a nice job of capturing, the essence of, what a group that knows each other can do with
Yes.
it too.
Yeah, for sure. I was so pleased that they had so much fun with it. I was like, I was pretty nervous when, I logged in to see how it was going to go. Um, and it was funny because it's definitely not a game for everyone, right? Like some people, that's just not what they would be excited about. Like someone in the chat genuinely like said, I would rather die than play this game kind of game, but I can see other people liking it, which was pretty hysterical. But we also feel like it does work for people who aren't necessarily good at improvising because of the connecting to each other, because even if you don't put out that many cards, you can still be the author because people are interested in whatever sort of like elements that you've contributed to the story. So um, hopefully it's something that, a good amount of folks would enjoy.
Yeah, it's neat, and just the construction of it, and trying to, well, and there's 3 different versions. So there's
Mhm.
sci-fi, mystery, and romance,
Yes.
and it takes kind of the meta elements of some of the genres and plays with those, and you can combine them. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot that people can enjoy, and like you said, maybe even for the person that said they'd rather die than play the game, it's something that you could potentially warm up and fall into as you feel the flow
For
of it
sure.
too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, speaking of the 3 different versions of 2, so you are a fan of sci-fi.
Hmm.
Was that your favorite one to work on? Uh, and do you also have any interest in other genres that helped inspire your work for the other ones? And then what are some of your other interests that have made your way into like your game design work?
Sure. Um, yes, sci-fi was my favorite, and when I demo at a convention or something, I always use the sci-fi one just because I have the most context for telling a sci-fi story, just because I have read a lot of sci-fi stories and enjoy them. Um, but yeah, so I did enjoy that one, and I co-designed the game with my husband Tom Rochelle and our friend Mike Callahan. So the game design aspect was a group effort, and then I did the graphic design and kind of the art direction on it, and then Kwanchai Moria did the um, cover illustration, which is super awesome. We worked together on on a number of projects, and I was really excited that he, was up for working on that because obviously he's, kind of a rock star in the industry. But anyway, yeah. So I feel like we each had our own. It was good to have multiple people kind of brainstorming the words for all the different genres because, like we all had different interests in like media that we enjoyed that we could kind of bring to the table.
Yeah, that's cool. And then kind of so backtracking a little bit, but okay, so you mentioned in like when you had that game group, the three of you designing it, when did that process start?
Right, yeah. So it started, I looked back to know specifically. It started about 9 years ago is when we started like play testing it. Yeah, this is actually kind of I'll try to make it a succinct long story. So we were play testing it and, kind of like we developed the game and then we submitted it to a Hasbro contest and we had to run an Indiegogo and like fulfill, like a crowdfunding campaign. And they were going to choose one of the finalists who did this like crowdfunding thing to win. And we ended up being the winner, which was super cool. So we got to like visit Hasbro and like get a tour of the, like studios and stuff. But they were supposed to publish it. That was kind of like part of the contest. But then, sort of I don't know like the full context, but they kind of moved in a different direction with that sort of like initiative where they were kind of focusing on a couple of indie games. So they had the rights for 3 years though. So we had to wait for that to lapse. I think actually maybe, I don't remember specifically, but it was sort of held up for a few years by that process, which I'm not complaining because it was an amazing experience, to be part of that. So, so that kind of delayed it a bit. And then it was like, pandemic and lockdown, there weren't game conventions to go be pitching at, because that's sort of where I was talking to publishers and, trying to find a new publisher for the game. So yeah, it only officially got released this past summer at Gen Con. So it was very, sort of like gratifying for it to finally be like crossed off the list and out there. But yeah, I think in the long run, I am a better graphic designer now than I was, when we first started it. And like, I wouldn't have been able to get Quanchai involved if it wasn't now that we were kind of finishing up. So I feel like it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it all. Definitely nice that it's done and that it is, published and released and people are playing it. But 9 or so years is a pretty long time.
Yeah.
But it's kind of I've mentioned it a couple times on the show, but I think thinking about the stories behind the games is neat, and the not coincidence, but the fact that it is the story behind this game, which is a game about storytelling, it gives it layers. So
yeah,
and it was meant to be in this particular form too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so in this, I mean, you've talked about a lot of the different work. So you do a lot of like graphic design work, and I think some of the examples you mentioned do talk about some of the different types of work that you will do for different games, but I know that it's not necessarily the same from project to project. You have done illustration work as well. You've done game design, so you do a lot. So with all that said, is game design something that you want to continue? And are there other things that you are wanting to create, currently working on, or anything along those lines?
Sure, yeah. I definitely want to do more game design. I was waiting. I didn't want to be working on more than one thing at a time, so I was kind of waiting for the plot thickens to be out there, which did take a while before kind of thinking about anything else. I do have sort of that document of like random ideas that I feel like a lot of folks who do anything with games have. But yeah, I feel like game design has that similar creative problem solving of, like trying something and then seeing how it works and refining it. And, that's just like a very sort of just satisfying creative process to me. So I hope to keep doing it. I do really like, I want to do, I like get to know you type games, but I find that a lot of them are kind of, I don't know. I feel like the perfect one doesn't exist yet. So that's something that I feel like would be fun to try to figure out. And then I was also working on kind of a big group icebreaker game before the pandemic, which, definitely put, I haven't play tested it since lockdown. So maybe now I can kind of take that one out and start thinking about it again. But
It's good timing to think about that idea.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, just sort of like that element of like creating moments of connection for people is just something that's really exciting and, that I would love to keep striving to do.
Yeah, neat. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of, party games and maybe kind of get to know you more or connect with the people that you do know. So thinking about it one step earlier and getting those initial connections and icebreakery type of moments.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel like there's something there. We'll see.
yeah, and I mean, I know, like personally, it's probably not something that I would have engaged with, but it is also
Sure.
something that no, but I mean, it's something that I'm looking to start to kind of like think about more and just going out more, maybe doing cons and going to different game stores and just like meeting people. So
Yeah. Do you
hey,
go to cons?
nope.
Yeah.
I definitely want to. You know, being in the Midwest, I'm close to some of the bigger ones.
Mm,
So that's nice, but I'd probably start in something more local. But
mm,
I feel like a few of the times where I've talked to friends or designers or people, just any sort of communication. Oh, I'll be going to, I think one's called Game Hole in Madison or something,
mm.
and I'll been coaching or something that's going on. So
Gotcha.
it's just tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're a lot of fun. I'm definitely an extrovert though, so I feel very energized by just like seeing all the other folks that I know in the industry and like hearing what people are working on. It's just like very inspiring.
I'm going to push myself to get there. I mean, again, it's one of those things. I mean, I like gaming. I like getting to know people, but it's just that initial energy. It's just that hurdle.
Sure. Yeah, they can be intimidating. It's a lot.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, I think that idea, like you said, there's something there, and I agree.
Nice.
So we are on to the wrap up questions, and technically you got three because you still have the goal,
Mm-hmm.
but the first one is the text that's been stuck on your mind. So anything from book, a board game, video game, show, movie, album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my answer to this is I read recently, This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's like a sci-fi novella. I think it won both the Nebula and the Hugo for best novella of the year it came out. But it's the first thing I read in a long time that I finished it, and then I just went to the beginning and needed to like start going through it again. And I think because it's the story, the premise is that it's like two time agents who are corresponding. It's sort of like their letters to each other. So there's lots of sort of like timey-wimey stuff happening. But yeah, I can't remember the last time that I read a book and then just like needed to sort of go through and try to process it again. Uh, it's like very delightful and creative. So I would recommend it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm definitely starting to get a little bit more into sci-fi and fantasy too. I'm just
Mm,
trying to read more in general. So that's
hmm
one of those things. But no, that sounds really interesting. And as somebody who takes a long time to read anything, shorter
Yeah.
shorter is a nice hook for me too. But
Yeah, it's a nice like weekend. You could do it in a weekend kind of read, I think.
good. I say that, but I always give myself the most ridiculously long and challenging books that I can. I think it's an excuse. It's like, oh, there's a reason this taken me a year to read.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any of those sci-fi things you've read recently that you've liked?
So
Especially.
I well, actually, well, kind of two, I guess. So I have been working through the Dune
Mm.
novels. So I've
Mm-hmm.
read the first two. The first one was long. The second one was super short, and I actually worked through that one pretty quickly.
Mm.
And it was a little more straightforward from a narrative standpoint, so I was able to kind of not not struggle as much.
Sure.
I don't think this is sci-fi necessarily, but another thing that I literally just finished as well, and it's probably like, oh, you haven't read that before, is The Watchmen. So,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and again, not necessarily sci-fi, but there are some sci-fi elements to it.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Cool.
yeah. But yeah, I'm definitely like I'm trying to just read and balance more, and I'm glad that I'm reading some of these series and starting them up. And a lot of the people that I've been talking to have recommended sci-fi books. I think one that just kind of pops in my head because I saw a trailer for, I think, a Netflix adaptation. It could be any one of those streaming
Mm.
services. Is Three Body Problem?
Hmm. Yeah, I have heard of that one. I haven't read it though.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like it was both popular and well received, and I think the getting that series is probably some level of validation. So,
Sure. Sure.
but now if I want to watch a show, I have to read the books first. So
Oh yeah. Yep. You always have to do it that way.
perfect. Well, this one is on my list, so I'll definitely let you know if when that's gotten to. I mean, it's going to. It's just more of the when.
Cool.
Neat. So you kind of mentioned that you are still thinking about design, but in terms of projects that you've been working on that you can talk about, things to look out for from you,
Sure.
anything there?
Yeah. Well, the plot thickens. General second printing. They just did a second printing of the detective, sci-fi, and romance. And then we're working on now, which will be releasing this year, another set of 3 genres. So adventure, horror, and fantasy. So those have been fun to work on. I think we're doing, yeah, I'm not sure, like they're not all coming out at once, but I'll be posting about them as they as they come out. But we think those will be fun ones to mix with the others as well. Like horror is one that lots of folks that I play, demo with at cons and stuff mention. So that's really exciting. That's coming out this year. And then just graphic design wise, I have a lot of cool projects with Bitewing Games, who you talked with Nick on another episode, which was fun to listen to. So I've got a bunch of projects that I'm working on with them that are coming out this year, and then some with them, and then just projects in general that Quanchai and I have collaborated on, or sort of like both been working on. So a lot of exciting graphic design projects coming out, and then more of the plot thickens stuff. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and yeah, that's nice now too that you have the first set out reprinted,
Hmm.
and then there's more right away.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll hope to keep up a little bit of momentum. We'll see.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing all of those things, both from Bitewing that you're working on design. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, final bit, and that is the kind of the lettering or logo for this episode.
Hmm. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking that thick plots is in like a black letter, like a thick black letter font, which is like the typeset sort of medieval vibe from Pentiment. And then sick fonts is sort of a modern like script and they're overlaid each other. I'm gonna I'm gonna make it really fast. And I'm gonna send it to you so you can include
Oh, I mean that would be perfect. That would make it. I mean, I didn't want to make you do work, but if you sketch it up, I
It'll
will.
be fast.
Perfect. I'll get that out everywhere. Awesome. Oh, I see it. I like that idea. I was visualizing it, but now that I have the visualization, I'm really curious to actually see it too.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know if it's what you pictured from what I explained.
Okay. I mean, I know my brain's not going to create something particularly good, so I know it's going to be way better. But, oh, this is what it was meant to be. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for giving some more clear and better and vibrant design to this episode, bringing all of your thoughts and stories and just kind of a different viewpoint and episode than anything that I've been able to talk about so far. So
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I was really excited to chat, and yeah, I appreciate you asking me to be on the show.
all right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Intertextual Cardboard Experience, the most eclectic podcast about board games and any other text that they connect to. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time here. Any further support, such as sharing the show with friends, following the page's socials in the episode description, writing a review, filling out the feedback form, or doing anything else you can think of is greatly appreciated. Keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing.